Some games are easy to overlook, but years later, you'll wonder how you ever missed them in the first place. I've picked 18 games that deliver unforgettable worlds, stories, combat, and moments that make every minute feel worth it. I still remember the first time Red Dead Redemption 2 made me forget I was even playing a game. I was riding through the wilderness when the sun started dropping behind the mountains. Nothing important was happening, yet I didn't want to leave. That's what makes this game so special. It doesn't constantly throw missions at you, it lets the world breathe. One minute, you're tracking an animal, and the next, you're caught in a random encounter that turns into a story of its own. Then there's Arthur Morgan, who might be one of the most believable characters gaming has ever created. His journey gets surprisingly personal, and the slow build makes the emotional moments hit much harder. The gunfights are great, but honestly, the quiet moments are what stayed with me. Red Dead Redemption 2 is huge, detailed, and sometimes deliberately slow, but if you give it time, it becomes an experience you won't forget. The Witcher 3. Wild Hunt is one of those games where I'd start with one simple objective, then somehow lose 3 hours chasing something completely different. I might head out to find a missing person, stumble into a strange village, and suddenly end up investigating a story I never expected. That freedom is a huge part of its charm. The world feels like it has problems happening everywhere, even when Geralt isn't around to solve them. And the quests are rarely as simple as good versus evil. Sometimes you make what seems like the right choice, only to discover later that someone paid a terrible price for it. Geralt's relationships also give the story plenty of personality, especially when the choices start affecting people he actually cares about. The combat can feel a little dated compared with newer action RPGs, and some early animations haven't aged perfectly. Still, once the story pulls you in, walking away becomes surprisingly difficult. The first time Elden Ring truly clicked for me, I stopped caring about where the game wanted me to go. I just picked a direction and started exploring. That decision led to hidden caves, strange enemies, unexpected bosses, and places I probably would have missed by following the main path. The lands between rewards curiosity in a way very few open-world games do. You can stumble into something terrifying, get destroyed, leave, become stronger, and come back later with a completely different approach, and the boss fights can be unforgettable. Some feel like brutal walls, while others become these incredible battles where every dodge suddenly matters. What I love most is how little the game explains. You're trusted to figure things out yourself, and that makes every discovery feel personal. It can be frustrating, especially when a boss destroys you for the 10th time. But when you finally win, that frustration turns into one of the best feelings in gaming. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of those games where a simple decision can completely change what happens next. You might walk into a room with a plan, choose one dialogue option, and suddenly find yourself dealing with a situation you never expected. That freedom is what makes every playthrough feel different. You can fight, sneak, talk your way through trouble, or come up with something completely ridiculous. The companions are just as important. They have their own personalities, secrets, and problems, and your choices can actually change how they see you. Even small decisions can come back hours later when you least expect them. The turn-based combat takes some getting used to, especially if you prefer fast action, but once it clicks, battles become incredibly creative. You can use the environment, combine abilities, or completely change your plan halfway through a fight. And because the game gives you so many possibilities, some of the best moments are the ones you accidentally create yourself. Cyberpunk 2077 surprised me because the moments I remember most aren't always the big action scenes. Sometimes it's simply driving through Night City at night, watching the streets glow while the radio plays in the background. The city has this strange energy that makes you want to keep exploring, even when there's no mission waiting for you. Then, the story pulls you into V's situation, and things become much more personal than I expected. Johnny Silverhand adds another layer to the journey, especially as their relationship slowly changes. The side quests are where Cyberpunk 2077 really caught me off guard. Some start as simple jobs and turn into stories I kept thinking about long after they ended. Combat is also incredibly flexible. You can run in with weapons, use cyberware, or approach situations almost completely through hacking. It isn't perfect, and the sheer amount of content can feel overwhelming at times, but once Night City gets its grip on you, it's very hard to put down. God of War Ragnarök is the kind of game that made me stop caring about the next big fight because I was more interested in what Kratos and Atreus were going to say to each other. Their relationship gives the journey a much more personal feeling, especially as Atreus starts wanting more control over his own choices. Then the action kicks in, and the combat feels incredibly satisfying. Switching between the Leviathan Axe, Blades of Chaos, and other abilities gives you plenty of ways to handle enemies without making every fight feel identical. The boss battles also know when to slow down and when to go completely over the top. What I really enjoyed, though, is how much the game rewards exploration. Some of the best moments happen when you leave the main path and discover a hidden area, a strange encounter, or a piece of story you weren't expecting. It can feel a little heavy on dialogue in certain sections, but those slower moments help make the characters feel more human. If you want a cinematic action game with real emotional weight, Ragnarök is absolutely worth your time. Ghost of Tsushima is one of those games where I sometimes forgot what I was supposed to be doing because the island kept pulling me somewhere else. I'd ride through a field, follow the wind toward a distant hill, and end up discovering something completely unexpected. That natural exploration is a huge part of why the world feels so enjoyable. Then you get into a sword fight, and everything becomes focused. Every parry, dodge, and perfectly timed strike feels deliberate. Jin's journey also gives the game more depth than just being a beautiful samurai adventure. He's forced to question the traditions he once followed, especially when protecting his people requires him to fight differently. The story takes its time with that conflict, and some of the quieter moments hit harder than the bigger battles. There's definitely some repetition if you try to clear every activity on the map. But if you let yourself explore without rushing, Ghost of Tsushima has a calm, cinematic quality that's incredibly easy to get lost in. Black Myth Wukong caught me off guard because it looks like a straightforward action game, but the deeper you get, the more there is to uncover. The combat is the obvious highlight. You have to watch enemy patterns, choose your moments, and make smart use of your abilities instead of simply attacking non-stop. Then, the bosses start getting more creative, and some fights can completely change how you approach combat. What I really enjoyed was the feeling of discovering something new after thinking I had already seen everything an area had to offer. Hidden paths, optional encounters, and strange locations can reward players who take their time. The game also has a strong visual identity, with environments that make even simple exploration feel impressive. It can be challenging, and some encounters can feel frustrating when you haven't figured out the right approach. But once a difficult boss finally goes down, that victory feels earned. Black Myth Wukong isn't just about reaching the next fight. It's about learning the enemy, improving your timing, and seeing how far your skill can take you. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is the kind of game that makes you forget you're playing a traditional RPG because so much of it feels grounded in everyday life. Henry isn't some unstoppable hero who walks into a village and destroys everyone. He can get beaten, embarrassed, or completely unprepared for what comes next. I actually like that about him. The world feels more believable because your choices often have consequences that aren't obvious right away. You might enter a conversation expecting one outcome and leave with an entirely different problem. The medieval setting also feels unusually lived in. Towns have routines, people react to what you do, and even traveling between locations can turn into an unexpected encounter. Combat takes some practice too, especially if you rush into fights without understanding your opponent. But once you get comfortable with it, winning a difficult duel feels incredibly satisfying. It can be slower than a typical action RPG, and that won't appeal to everyone. Still, if you want a medieval adventure that rewards patience and makes you feel like you're actually living in its world, this one deserves your attention. Clair Obscur. Expedition 33 is the kind of RPG that grabbed my attention because it feels unlike most modern fantasy games. The world has this strange beauty to it, but there's always something unsettling underneath the surface. You're following the expedition as they face a mission that already feels almost impossible, and the story wastes little time making the stakes feel personal. What really surprised me is the combat. It's turn-based, but it doesn't feel passive. You're constantly watching enemy attacks, timing dodges and parries, and deciding when to spend your strongest abilities. That extra layer makes even familiar encounters feel more engaging. Then there's the art direction, which gives the game a distinctive identity without relying on a generic fantasy setting. The characters also carry a lot of the emotional weight, and their relationships make the journey feel more than just another quest. It's not the kind of RPG I'd recommend if you only want fast, straightforward action, but if you're willing to slow down and learn its rhythm, Expedition 33 can deliver something genuinely memorable. Resident Evil 4 Remake wastes almost no time reminding you why Leon Kennedy is having a really bad day. The opening village sequence throws you into chaos, and from there, the game rarely lets the tension disappear for long. What impressed me most is how it constantly changes the mood. One moment you're carefully moving through a dark room, listening for something nearby. Then suddenly, everything goes completely insane. The combat feels heavier and more satisfying than the original, especially when you're managing your ammo and trying to survive against groups of enemies. I also love how the remake makes Leon feel more human. His reactions and conversations give the story a little more personality without slowing everything down. And just when you think you figured out the rhythm, the game throws another strange location or enemy at you. It's not a perfect horror experience because the action eventually becomes a huge part of the game. But that mix of tension, exploration, and ridiculous moments is exactly why it works so well.
This just keeps getting worse.
Alan Wake 2 is one of those games where I kept asking myself what was real and what I was supposed to believe. The strange part is, the game seems perfectly happy leaving you confused for a while. You switch between Saga Anderson and Alan Wake, and their stories slowly start connecting in ways that can get seriously weird. The atmosphere is probably the biggest reason I'd recommend it. Walking through a dark forest with almost nothing but your flashlight can feel more stressful than a full enemy encounter. Then the game suddenly changes its style, using surreal scenes and unexpected shifts that make you question what comes next. I also love how the story uses creativity as part of the experience instead of treating it like background decoration. The combat is slower and more deliberate, which fits the horror perfectly. Some sections can feel deliberately strange, and the pacing won't work for everyone. But if you enjoy psychological horror, mystery, and stories that keep you guessing, Alan Wake 2 is incredibly hard to forget. Silent Hill 2. Remake is the kind of horror game that made me uncomfortable even when nothing was happening. You can walk down an empty street, hear something moving through the fog, and suddenly start wondering if you should keep going. That tension is what makes the town feel so disturbing. James Sunderland isn't simply exploring a creepy place. He's searching for answers about his past, and the story slowly gives you reasons to question everything around him. The fog, abandoned buildings, strange creatures, and unsettling sound design all work together without constantly throwing enemies at you. Combat is there, but it never feels like the main attraction. I found myself more focused on what might be waiting around the next corner. The remake also gives the environments much more detail, making familiar locations feel genuinely threatening. Some puzzles can slow the pace, and the deliberate movement won't suit everyone. But if you want horror built around atmosphere, mystery, and psychological tension, Silent Hill 2 Remake is an experience that stays in your head long after you turn the game off. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is the kind of game where I'd launch it just to play for 20 minutes, then realize I'd spent an hour swinging around New York. The web swinging feels so smooth that fast travel almost seems unnecessary. You've got Peter Parker and Miles Morales, and switching between them gives the combat and story a nice change of pace. Peter brings his own style, while Miles has abilities that can turn a normal fight into complete chaos. The story also knows when to slow things down and focus on the characters, especially when Peter's choices start affecting the people around him. Then you get moments involving Venom that completely change the energy of the game. I won't spoil those parts, but some sequences are easily among the most memorable in the series. The open world does have some familiar activities, and not every side mission feels equally important. Still, when you're flying between skyscrapers, stopping crimes, and jumping straight into another fight, Spider-Man 2 captures the superhero fantasy incredibly well.
Spider-Man, help!
Indiana Jones and the Great Circle surprised me because it feels more like an Indiana Jones adventure than a typical action game. You're not just running from one shootout to another. A lot of the fun comes from exploring ancient locations, searching for clues, and figuring out what the game is quietly hiding around you. The puzzles also give you a reason to actually pay attention to your surroundings. Sometimes the answer is sitting right in front of you, but you only notice it after looking at the environment differently. Then there's the whip, which is useful for more than just swinging across gaps. Combat can get messy, and honestly, that fits indie perfectly. You can sneak around, throw whatever is nearby, or just start punching your way through trouble. The first-person perspective might take some getting used to if you expected a third-person adventure, but it works surprisingly well for exploration. What makes the game stand out is its sense of discovery. It feels like you're uncovering an old adventure instead of simply moving from one mission marker to another. Death Stranding is probably the strangest game on this list, and that's exactly why I think it deserves a spot. At first, delivering packages across a ruined America sounds like the least exciting idea imaginable. Then you actually start walking through the world, planning your route, balancing your cargo, and dealing with whatever the landscape throws at you. Suddenly, reaching your destination feels like an achievement. What surprised me most is how the game turns other players into part of your journey without forcing you into traditional multiplayer. A bridge, ladder, or piece of equipment left behind by someone else can completely change a difficult trip. The story is also incredibly weird, but there's a surprising amount of emotion underneath all the mystery. It can be painfully slow at times, especially early on, and the delivery-focused gameplay definitely isn't for everyone. But if you give it enough time, the quiet moments start making sense. Death Stranding is less about constant action and more about the feeling of finally connecting places that once felt impossible to reach. Disco Elysium is the game I'd recommend when you want an RPG that feels completely different from almost everything else. You play a detective who wakes up with no memory of what happened, and from there, even talking to someone can become a full-blown adventure. What makes it special is that your character's own thoughts can argue with you. One part of your mind might push you toward a decision while another tells you it's a terrible idea. That creates some genuinely funny and surprisingly uncomfortable situations. There's very little traditional combat, but that never made the game feel boring to me. The real battles happen through conversations, investigations, and the choices you make when things start going wrong. The writing is also sharp without making every character feel like a walking exposition dump. It can be slow, especially if you're expecting constant action, and the amount of dialogue might turn some players away. But if you enjoy strange mysteries, memorable characters, and choices that actually feel personal, Disco Elysium is absolutely worth experiencing.
The whole thing committed to memory, but there's a line in it I think about sometimes. In dark times, should the stars also go out?
Batman Arkham City is one of those games where the second you start gliding across the rooftops, you immediately feel like Batman. I could spend ages just moving through the city, dropping behind enemies, scanning the area, and deciding how I wanted to handle the next encounter. The combat is still one of its biggest strengths. Once you understand the timing, Batman can chain punches, counters, gadgets, and takedowns together without breaking the flow. But the story is what gives the whole experience its weight. The Joker's presence creates this constant tension, while villains like Mr. Freeze get their own memorable moments that don't feel like simple side quests. I also love how the city itself encourages exploration. You'll spot something interesting in the distance, investigate it, and often discover another little piece of Batman's world. Some mechanics show their age today, especially compared with newer action games. Still, very few superhero games have captured the feeling of being Batman this completely. If you missed Arkham City, this is one you really shouldn't leave sitting in your backlog.
You're gonna die here, Batman.
And that's the list. Now I want to know which game you're most excited to play. Drop your pick in the comments and let me know which game you think deserves a spot on this list. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more gaming lists. I'll see you in the next one.